Hello and happy Easter. In this talk, I'm going to be attempting to wrestle through some of the significances of Easter morning, of celebrating the resurrection of the Son of God, what I think is probably the most central belief of Christianity. So, whether this is brand new to you, whether this is something you've thought about and celebrated Easter many times, hopefully, God will have something new for us as well. So, I'm going to look at one of the very traditional readings out of John chapter 20 this morning, and just to provide a little bit of context, the Gospel of John reminds us that although Jesus was a teacher, he was teaching, um, just God's ways, the way to do life, kind of a different path and way of being in the world. Ultimately, the Gospel of John reminds us again and again that the central idea of Jesus' teachings was not a set of ideals, it was not a set of practices either, it was himself. It was a person. He says things like, I am the resurrection and the life. You can't get around from me. I am redefining what it means to be the king. I am the one who has a relationship with God that I want you to both imitate and partake in. And so, this group of people that was around him, as they begin to realize how central Jesus himself as a person is to his teaching, to relating to God, you can imagine how devastating it is when this person that they have basically bet it all on is killed and tortured and is dead. And so they spend this day after Good Friday, this Sabbath, wondering what went wrong, wondering what purpose their lives have at this point. They had bet it all on Jesus, and Jesus had lost in so many of their eyes. And that's kind of the mentality we find this woman Mary in as we start our story. She's going in the dark, one of John's favorite symbols for not understanding or connecting with God the right way. And as far as we can tell, she doesn't have a real purpose in going to the tomb. She just wants to be near Jesus. She just wants to mourn. And so in chapter 20, we read, early in the morning on the first day of the week, while it was still dark, Mary Magdalene came to the tomb and saw that the stone had been taken away from the tomb. She ran to Simon Peter and the other disciple, the one whom Jesus loved, and said, they've taken the Lord from the tomb. We don't know where they've put him. And so she goes, and her assumption at this point is just that another degradation. There's just one more insult to this man that she loved so much. Now they have stolen his body. She comes and, grave robbers are involved, and she doesn't know who else to go to. So she goes to these two men who were so close to Jesus. And the story continues in verse 3 that Peter and the other disciple left to go to the tomb. They were running together, but the other disciple ran faster than Peter and was the first to arrive at the tomb. Bending down to take a look, he saw the linen clothes lying there, but he didn't go in. Following him, Simon Peter entered the tomb and saw the linen clothes lying there. He also saw the face cloth that had been on Jesus' head. It wasn't with the other clothes, but folded up on its own place. Then the other disciple who had arrived at the tomb first also went inside. He saw and believed. They didn't yet understand the scripture that Jesus must rise from the dead. Then the disciples returned to the place where they were staying. So this section I love because it just shows a lot of personality. It's lots of good little quick shots of who these two men were, and this will be significant as the story of kind of that morning and Jesus um, restoring these two men to their positions as disciples is going to be significant. So we do see kind of some quick shots of their personalities here as well. John, of course, is seems like he's a younger man, and so he gets there first. He goes and runs, but he sees and he sees enough basically. Sits there. He kind of looks, and he immediately starts reflection, starts thinking of what is the significance. He goes internal to try and figure out the significance of this strange event, which seems to be kind of a hallmark of both his gospel and his letters later on. He just seemed to be a very astute, reflective person who really wanted to figure out the significance. Peter, on the other hand, shows up and spends no time thinking about it. He just barges right in, and he's the first one to notice that the clothes and then this cloth that was around his head um, has been neatly folded up, which is kind of an odd detail, but very much in line with what we read in the Gospel of John. Again, this reflective man seemed to be pretty observant too. And Peter goes in and notices this, and John notes some significance to it. Probably is told here, one, to just remind us that this man John was there, but also to show some separation between another resurrection he recounted just a few chapters earlier, that of Lazarus, who, when Lazarus comes out, he needs help, right? He's brought back to life, and yet he's still wrapped up, and specifically we're told he's got this kind of corpse cloth around his face still, whereas whatever has happened here is different, right? Jesus apparently had the time to undo the cloth and then neatly fold it. Why? Because he didn't need it anymore. He wasn't dead. And so there's a difference between his resurrection and the one he did before. And we're told here that the other disciple who arrived first, he went and saw, and he saw and believed. So again, he's not in a place yet where he can necessarily share with others this insight, but he's starting to figure it out together, although he hasn't put together maybe the meaning or the why of this, which we're told that they didn't understand yet the scripture that Jesus must rise from the dead, that this was the plan all along, that this had been predicted, that Jesus tried to teach them both the horror of his death, but also the fact that he is going to be resurrected. So John, in his kind of quiet reflection, we see him starting to get it and the significance of it. Peter barges in there, gets to notice some of these things first, but it hasn't clicked yet for him. And kind of this is a prelude in some ways to both of these men meeting Jesus a little later on. But at this point in the story, these guys are not the main event, because we've got another character here as well, right? And that's Mary, who seems to go back with them, who never leaves. And so we continue to read that Mary stood outside the tomb, crying. And as she cried, she bent down to look into the tomb. She saw two angels dressed in white, seated where the body of Jesus had been, one at the head and one at the foot. And the angels asked her, "Woman, why are you crying?" She replied, "They've taken away my Lord, and I don't know where they've put him." And as soon as she said this, she turned around and saw Jesus standing there, but she didn't know it was Jesus. Jesus said to her, "Woman, why are you crying? Who are you looking for?" And thinking he was the gardener, she replied, "Sir, if you've carried him away, tell me where you've put him, and I will get him." Again, we talked about how this story shows kind of character, right? We see Peter barging in, we see John reflecting, but here I think we see something really neat about Mary, who up until this point in the story we don't know much about, but she just seems to deeply love Jesus, and I love just kind of how irrational she is at this point. She is so focused on finding Jesus, on her Lord. She misses the fact that there are two angels sitting there. Most people freak out when they see angels, right? The angels, I think, are also kind of a hint to both Mary and to us that this is not a grave robber that we're looking for. Angels always represent God's presence. God has done something here that is unique in significance. And she is so single-mindedly focused on finding a corpse, the body of her Lord, that she misses when she turns around that he is right there in front of her. The very thing she wanted, but probably did not have the ability to hope for. She is too raw. She's too hurt. All she wants is some kind of small token to hold on to help her remember Jesus and what could have been, what might have been. And I think that symbol, this moment before the revelation comes, is a really important one in this story, and I think it's one that applies to us so much of the time. So much of the time, all we really want is a remnant, a corpse in some ways, that can remind us of the things that used to be or the things we had hoped for. We are reminded and we just expect something small for our loss, some way of remembering, right? And yet standing before us often is the thing we want, the thing that God is offering, God himself, God in his fullness, the light and life of Jesus. But it's probably not many times going to be in the form we expect. And so we miss it. We keep looking for this scrap, this corpse, when God himself is standing in front of us. And I love how this story continues. Jesus said to her, Mary. She turned and said to him in Aramaic, Rabboni, which means teacher, slipping away from that, Lord, my Lord, the formal talk, back into the way she probably talked to him when he was alive and with her. So Jesus said to her, Don't hold on to me, for I haven't yet gone up to my Father. Go to my brothers and sisters and tell them, I'm going up to my Father and to your Father, to my God and to your God. Mary Magdalene left and announced to the disciples, I've seen the Lord. Then she told them what he said to her. And so I think it's significant that she's not able to recognize kind of Jesus in this new form. Maybe it's because she's just too sad and distraught. Maybe it's because she's blinking away tears. Maybe it's because Jesus' face has changed in some way. The disciples seem to have trouble recognizing him at times. But whatever it is, she's able to recognize his voice. The way he talks to her again, she's able to recognize the voice of the good shepherd, as his sheep do, to use a metaphor Jesus supplied earlier in this story. She's able to see him because Jesus helps her do it. And that's a significant part, I think, of recognizing the way God works in the world. He often is bringing light and life in ways we don't expect and in places we don't expect. And there's this baffling comment in here, don't hold on to me, for I haven't yet gone up to the Father. So people have made a lot of this significant. Is she grabbing at him? Is she holding on to him? Does Jesus not want to be touched? I find that interpretation a little hard to believe, considering a few verses later he's going to let Thomas touch the kind of the holes in his hands itself. I think the idea of holding on that he's asking her to let go of is, I think she's kind of grabbing at him. She's so excited to see him again, and I think that's a good expression of his love. But I think he is trying to transition her, just like he will with the other disciples later in this story, into a recognition that, yes, I'm alive, I'm resurrected. In the end, light and life, and I win over death and sin and those things. But things are not going to be quite the way we used to do. She used to be able to be near him in a very special way as a disciple, right? But after death, after the resurrection, the relationship has changed. Jesus will not be available in quite the same way he was beforehand. And I think that the gospel story here and other places acknowledges this loss. The death was real. The becoming sin for our sake was real. This world has a lot of loss. There are some things that are just so dark and that are so wrong, they will leave scars, including Jesus himself shows his scars, right? He's not going to get away from this thing totally scot-free. And yet the fact that there is a loss of the availability of Jesus and the relationship is going to change and move in a new direction is overall a positive thing. Again, that does not mean this loss of Jesus' availability or much more significantly, the cross itself are positive things because God can use them. They are not. And I think the Bible is unequivocal in saying the cross was a horror. The cross was something that was wrong. There are many true injustices. There are many true tragedies and true sorrows in this world. But just because they are true darkness does not mean God cannot use them and bring something new out of it. We get a hint of this here, right? Up until this point, Jesus, with all the disciples, including probably Mary here, has talked to them as a teacher or as a parent, those types of metaphors. He's talked down to them in a lot of ways because he is obviously wiser than they are. He's more spiritual. He's trying to teach them something. But he refers both to the disciples and to God in a very different way in this when he's telling her new task. He says, Don't hold on to me. I haven't gone up to my Father. Go to my brothers and my sisters. So he's acknowledging that they are brothers and sisters now. They are peers. They are friends. They are family. The disciples' relationship to both Jesus and implied to God the Father himself has changed because of this event. they have an access to God and to Jesus that they did not have before. They may have been able to see him more, but they didn't have kind of that same relationship. This new relationship is different, but in some ways it's stronger, it's more intimate. It's surprising in some ways that God is willing to talk about these people this way, right? And then he continues that and says, to my God and to your God. So this growth of familiarity, the audacity of kind of being a peer is also applied to God now because of the work that Jesus did. And the other kind of implication here is this new relationship has some responsibility involved with it. The first thing he says, like, you don't get to just hang on to me. We don't just get to be together. I also have some work I need you to be doing. And so go and tell my brothers and sisters, yes, I'm going to my Father and your Father, to my God and to your God. So she does it. She left and announces to the disciples, I've seen the Lord. And then she told him what he had said to her. As the story goes on, they don't particularly believe her. They need to see on their own in some ways and experience God, but that doesn't seem to matter to her. She has seen the Lord. She knows something. She knows that God is alive again. She knows that Jesus has overcome death and pain. She knows that her relationship has changed. She is a sister and a child of God himself. She's no longer just a student. She has stepped into a new responsibility, yes, but also incredible new privileges as God's beloved, as God's child. And I think we see that here. And so I think this Easter story has so many echoes and themes that we're going to see the rest of John, but just through the entire Bible, the entire way God tells this story of the significance of Easter. Easter does not make light of the cross, the most horrific thing that has ever happened in human history. The fact God came among us, healed, taught, showed the way of light and life, and humanity chose to reject God, kill him. And yet he used this death to become the death of sin as well, and to bring a resurrection. So yes, he still had the scars, but I think Easter points out that there is nothing beyond the touch of God. The horror of the cross itself can be turned to good purposes. It can bring about something brand new, this new, fuller relationship of God to both his disciples and to God the Father himself, just like it continues to do for all of us. And so I think holding these 2 points in tension is one of the true beauties of this story and of Easter itself. The horrors of the world do not get the last say. God can bring hope out of it, and that seems to be the story of all of creation. No matter how dark sin was, no matter how degraded the human culture, world, our very lives become, God can draw beauty and hope and significance out of it. He can change it, and he can bring something as beautiful as the restoration of the world and relationship to God out of it. And so I think we find ourselves in this place so much of the time. We are mourning, we are standing in the darkness, we are simply looking for a memento, a token of our loss, of our pain. And God is standing right in front of us. We need his help to be called out of kind of our self-centeredness, our darkness, to see what he is actually up to, that he is right before us in a different form than we're expecting, but with the privileges of a new relationship to God itself, with the privileges of having hope in any situation whatsoever. And so I just think we need to take this opportunity again to look for those places of narrowness, those places of darkness, and reject them. And say, God, yes, the pain, the sorrow of these is real. It is not the end of the story. I have hope. I trust you. I cannot wait to know you in a new way, to see what you will bring out of this, to be a part of this ongoing story which ends in the redemption of all things and all people, and all forms of darkness lose. So happy Easter, everyone. I hope that we can all sense God's presence in a new way and not trust the sorrows of life, but trust God and what he can do with them. This is a story of hope. It is a story of what God can do and is doing and will do completely one day.